The coalition has reached the presumed midpoint of its term, and with it the associated handover of the Deputy Prime Ministership. And so, to mark the occasion, RNZ sat down with the players involved.
I certainly won't be losing my freedom to think.
This time, we're getting the firepower, the army ready.
I don't think we've ever had an environment where both the future and current Deputy Prime Ministers are so actively criticising the Prime Minister.
That will be a pretty seamless transition.
Kia ora ko Craig McCulloch aho and te purongo tōrangapu mō tēnei wiki. Welcome to Focus on Politics. The number 2 spot was a bone of contention in coalition negotiations, one of the last sticking points to be unstuck.
Are you the next Deputy Prime Minister?
Have a great day, let's go.
There's a clear case for that to happen.
There's more conversations to have.
The eventual solution was an unorthodox job share arrangement. The sensitivities clear from the outset.
We're not co-deputies.
No.
Get it right for a start.
There is one Deputy
What's wrong
Prime
with
Minister at a point in time. The role is shared.
No, we're not sharing it either. I'm taking the first 18 months and David's taking the second 18 months.
That halfway mark is now here. From Sunday on, David Seymour will be the ACT Party's first ever Deputy Prime Minister.
It's a great honour, I'm very proud of it, but for people who think this is a major change, I've actually been the acting Prime Minister several times and we're all still here, so don't worry.
As for the New Zealand First Leader, Winston Peters, currently out of the country, he's matter of fact about handing over the job.
We signed up to that in 2023, so we don't have reflections on it. You just stick to your word and keep going.
In practice, it means some shuffling of seats in the debating chamber and cabinet room, as well as a little more work for David Seymour. He'll become the go-to acting PM when Christopher Luxon's overseas, and will front opposition questions on his behalf in Parliament most Thursdays. Mr Luxon once described the role as largely ceremonial, and 18 months on, he still stands by that.
Yeah, I do. I think it's basically, when the Prime Minister's out of the country, you're the acting Prime Minister. I'm in and out of a country pretty quickly. When I do my trips, I'm pretty fast and in and out and back home.
Neither of his deputies take too kindly to that.
All right, well, that might be the case, but look, I cover for him on Thursdays and no one asks him any questions. I kind of think that tells you something.
Well, he doesn't think it's ceremonial when he leaves the country and relies on you to act for him. So, there are some serious aspects to it. A couple of times when I've been acting Prime Minister, we had the crowd strike, we had the Chinese ships, and you do feel a responsibility that at least technically you're the person on the spot for those decisions.
David Seymour has made a habit this term of speaking his mind, at times even criticising his coalition partners. But if they were hoping for a more temperate approach, now he has a new role.
I'm astonished you believe that my tone would need moderation or my remarks would need constraint. I certainly won't be losing my freedom to think and to speak and to express what people in our communities are thinking, because that is the duty of a politician, to speak freely on behalf of those New Zealanders so that their hopes and dreams and concerns and fears can be fleshed out in a democratic arena rather than the ones that some other countries use.
You certainly haven't been afraid to criticise the Prime Minister or National on occasion. Do you see that the role of Deputy Prime Minister constrains you at all from doing that?
Well, I think if you look very carefully, I've never criticised. However, I have on several occasions had to respond to criticism, and hopefully that won't be necessary again in this term of government.
At the same time, he says he intends to discharge his new duties very well, to demonstrate ACT as a serious player.
My job will be to show New Zealanders that ACT is politically competent and can deliver and execute in government. This is another chapter of that becoming DPM.
He has not sought any advice from his predecessor.
I think he's, for the most part, trying to teach by demonstrating, and some of those lessons I'll take, others I might leave with him.
When asked by RNZ, Winston Peters has no lessons to impart, though he notes the privilege of the job comes with constraints too.
You're the second minister in the cabinet. You have to fill in for the Prime Minister frequently on occasions when he's not here or when he's around the country on the Thursday. So those are serious constraints.
What about your ability to speak your mind?
Well, speaking your mind is marvellous, but we're not in a free think society here. We're in a coalition, and one should always remember it.
So do you think that you will be freer now without that role?
No, not to that extent, because, we're still in the coalition. Just happen to be that our role will change.
Freed from some of the workload, the New Zealand First Leader is now turning his mind to the looming campaign, promising a series of roadshows around the country.
This time, we're getting the firepower, the army ready We are better prepared than we've ever been in this party's political career.
And he's clear that next term he wants to avoid a repeat of this novel arrangement.
It's our intention to remove any doubt next election.
So what does that look like? Two-party government?
No, I'm not saying what it looks like. I'm saying what it looks like for us is to go out there and establish a relationship with hundreds of thousands of New Zealanders who need a party that understands the plight of the ordinary people.
Do you not think it is a good model to have a handover in the Deputy Prime Ministership?
If we'd have been given a fair go in the 2023 election, there'd have been no need for handover.
And you're hoping for that, I guess, 2026?
We don't go into campaign hoping. We have a thing called preparation planning.
The exact date of the next election remains unset, but both men say the plan is the full-term, stable government. That will be welcome news to the Prime Minister, who sat down with RNZ's political editor Joe Moyer to reflect on the term and the handover.
For us, that felt like the right solution and the way through it, and that will be a pretty seamless transition.
When you think about the job of Prime Minister, there's the running the country bit, but then there's the running the coalition bit is quite a big part of it in a coalition as well. How difficult at times has sort of that relationship management been, or has it been a breeze?
No, I mean, it requires work, but I guess I came to politics realising that we're actually in the people business, and I think they actually, I often am, I said to Amanda, I'm really surprised often people in politics don't have very good people skills, and having built teams and then having to rebuild the National Party, I think we did that exceptionally well. And so now when you introduce coalition partners, it's a similar process. It's slightly different, but yeah, you spend a lot of time trying to make sure the coalition is working. It doesn't mean you agree on everything, but because you've got relationship and trust, you can actually have disagreements, and it's not personal, it's just that we're agreeing to disagree essentially. But we're going to carry on and keep working towards the things that we can work together on.
Are you daily talking to both David and Winston, or is it more of a texting relationship? Like, explain to me what that relationship's like.
Combination of everything. I'm a person who really does like face-to-face time, and actually the physical time together is actually really important, and I've got some set piece meetings by which we do that. But equally, I'm usually on the phone to one of them or both of them in a given day. We're communicating continuously. And I think, we're at a really interesting time. I know I said it on day one of forming the government, but I've also studied MMP political systems in Western Europe, and I still think in many ways the media and the public think we're often in a first past the post system, not realising that we're in a mature MMP environment. And when I talk to Mark Rutte, who ran a successful coalition for many years as a centre-right leader in the Netherlands, when I talk to Kaja Kallas in Estonia, I think about all of the Western European conversations with different leaders about how they manage coalitions, I think we're doing pretty well.
I guess then if you look at David in particular, probably more so than Winston, he's quite happy and thinks that MMP has matured enough and evolved enough to that you can publicly air disagreements quite regularly and even contradict some of the comments from national ministers or from yourself. I mean, do you think that that's helpful to the relationship though when it's that public?
Well, there will be differences, right? But I mean, on the vast majority of what we deal with each and every day, there is massive alignment, right? We wouldn't be in coalition government if we didn't think there were three parties that could work together. There are several things that I've done to make sure that we are very focused and we're very aligned. The first is I spend a lot of time going through a lot of detail, putting together coalition agreements that I think were quite specific and quite deep. And then each of us all signed each other's coalition agreements, so that actually all three, Winston signed David's agreement, David signed Winston's agreement, so that we're all aligned about what that work plan looks like for the term of the government, essentially. But look, there are moments when there are public disagreements, and you've seen that, and you'll continue to see that as we go forward. There will be moments sometimes in those agreements where, as you've seen recently on firearms, where actually we as a cabinet we made a different decision than what was proposed in the paper, which was from an ACT party. And we give them, they have permission to then go out and differentiate that position publicly. And I'm quite relaxed about that, because it's just recognising, rightly or wrongly, this is the system that New Zealanders have voted for. They go to an election, we make the case for why we want to increase our respective party votes to get as strong a position as we can, to give as much certainty and stability to a future government. Then we are tasked to make it work. And so this is the system New Zealand wants, this is the system they have, and then they make us make it work. And I think we're doing a good job of making it work.
Because, I mean, what that sounds to me me like the short version of it is basically it's fine if there's public disagreement and contradiction and whatever, because the framework and the underlying mechanism is the coalition agreement and the policy, and that's there and that's not going to change, so therefore the rest of the stuff doesn't matter. Would that be a fair...
In some ways, I mean, the key thing that matters to us is the coalition commitments that we've made, and some of that has required some compromise on all sides. First and foremost, both parties had to sign up to a National Party agenda and be up for our plan. And then, there's also things that were peculiar or particular to both New Zealand First and ACT that are in those agreements that maybe National didn't agree with. And I think New Zealanders are mature enough to understand, look, they're getting a government that's really united on the core of rebuild the economy, restore law and order, better public services. Yes, there'll be differences on the margins, as you would expect, and there are differences in the parties and the policies and the constituents that they're talking to. And we've got to allow enough space for that to happen.
Unsurprisingly, the opposition leader, Chris Hipkins, takes a different view on the coalition's success in balancing those different perspectives. Though, of course, Labour has its own balancing act to consider, with its prospective partners, the Greens and Te Pāti Māori.
Christopher Luxon is allowing ACT and New Zealand First to exert far more influence over his government's direction than their share of the vote suggests they should have. And I do think that distinguishes him from Helen Clark and from Bill English and John Key, who were still clear the party that wins the most votes should be the dominant party in government. And I don't think that's the way the National Party are operating.
Is that not partly just the evolution of MMP as well, though?
No, I don't think so. Because I think when you look at some of the things that they've put on the table now, they're things that the vast majority of New Zealanders voted against. Take the Treaty Principles Bill, for example. ACT were the only party in Parliament who campaigned on that with 8%, and yet it's become one of the most divisive debates in this term of Parliament. Stronger leadership would have said, no, actually 8% of the vote does not mean you get to hijack the whole government's agenda in the way that David Seymour did with the Treaty Principles Bill.
Coming back to your side of the fence and the Greens and Te Pāti Māori, how concerned are you about some of the more sort of out there policy positions that they may take and what sort of an impact that's going to have on you portraying an alternative government?
I think what will be important for Labour as we head into the next election is being very clear on the areas that are no-go zones for us. So when I stand up and say Labour will not do X or will not support Y after the election, I think we need to make sure voters know that and also accept that we won't then change our position after the election on those issues. I think that will actually be really important for public faith in the current system of democracy that we have. I think if you have too much flip-flopping where parties say one thing before the election and do the other, that's where you get a lot more disenchantment with democracy overall. And you're seeing that around the world. I think we have to avoid that here in New Zealand.
How closely are you engaging with those other co-leaders from the Greens and Te Pāti Māori, though? Like, if you look at something like with Te Pāti Māori, the Privileges Committee issue, or you look at the way that the Greens have handled some of their internal issues, are they coming to you asking for advice or help as someone who's been around here a little bit longer? I mean, are you engaging with them and perhaps these aren't the best things to be talking about, or this is not the best way to be doing that?
I mean, I talk to the Greens and, you know, I've had private conversations with the leaders of the Greens and even with Te Pāti Māori as well, and are happy to continue to do that. But we are separate parties and ultimately we're each responsible for our own decisions. And voters will ultimately judge that. You know, I think there are a lot of Māori women up and down the country who would like to have seen the Māori Party talking about the fact that the government's cut their pay rather than the song and dance around the Privileges Committee. But ultimately they get to judge that as the voting public.
Is it more or less likely that you will rule out New Zealand First ahead of the next election?
My position on that hasn't changed since the election, which is, you know, we said we weren't going to work with them last time, and I think that's unlikely to change.
Even if the political landscape suggests that that might mean that another 3 years in opposition?
Mm-hmm. To be honest, I think New Zealanders have had a guts full of having David Seymour and Winston Peters holding the country to ransom, and I don't want to do anything that gives them more power to do that.
Do you think Christopher Luxon, to a certain extent, probably deserves a bit of credit that he's actually kept them together, given everything that's been going on?
I don't think we've ever had an environment where both the future and current Deputy Prime Ministers are so actively criticising the Prime Minister. If basically relinquishing any kind of personal credibility in the role of Prime Minister is anyone's definition of holding the government together, I think they should think again.
How do you think the handover is going to go?
Look, I think the government will continue on until the election, regardless of who the Deputy Prime Minister is. Turkeys don't vote for an early Christmas.
What do you make of David Seymour saying, well, the public can accept that you can have two parties who are in government together, where you've got a Prime Minister as one of the leaders and the Deputy Prime Minister as the other, but you can, publicly disagree on lots of stuff?
People accept that come election time, parties will differentiate, parties will argue with each other, even parties that work together will disagree with each other more vigorously in an election campaign. But if you're doing that right the way through the parliamentary term, what you're saying to the New Zealand public is that you think your own political interests are more important than theirs. And I don't think that's a good way of governing the country.
Not long after that interview, Winston Peters himself unequivocally ruled out working with the Labour Party under Chris Hipkins' leadership. Not a huge surprise, but it does draw a clear line in the sand. Labour is in a mirror position to National, chasing that centre vote, while their minor partners increasingly push into more radical territory. And both parties' success, or otherwise, in navigating that dynamic, will likely inform their electoral outcome. That was Focus on Politics. I'm Craig McCulloch. Thanks for joining me. Mā te wā.